Welcome and thank you for taking the time to join us today. My name is Sarah Kendrick. I work for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in the Migratory Bird Unit for Region 3 in the Midwest. Welcome to the Midwest Migration Network's virtual meeting series. This is the Telemetry / Modus group, the best one, in my opinion. Like I've said, please introduce yourself in the chat by giving your affiliation and where you're located. That would be great. And we will go ahead here and get started. I will go ahead and share my screen. Okay. Right, so yes, as I said, I work for the Fish and Wildlife Service, but I was previously with the Missouri Department of Conservation. Just very briefly about myself, I've been involved in Modus for the past 5 or 6 years, I believe. I'm the Midwest Modus Coordinator, which is a very loose designation with the Midwest Migration Network, more so acting as a contact for the Midwest. People are interested in getting involved in Modus and trying to link up partners and get more stations up and tagging efforts here in the future. In Missouri, just for context, we've placed about 20 Modus stations in the last few years with grants and many partners on this call, certainly not alone, and with lots of funders and helpers there. We've also helped to install Motus stations in the Neotropics too, which I'm particularly proud of. I'll go ahead and talk through the other meeting series sessions. We have had 2 already that have been recorded, and we will be sending those out to participants. I believe Stephanie will be posting those on our YouTube channel. So today is the Telemetry Modus one, and next Tuesday, same time, is the Great Lakes Wind and Wildlife Coalition's meeting. We have the link there to register for future meetings if you're interested. Just a little housekeeping, this program is being recorded. Please turn off your camera or mute yourself if you do not want to be recorded. And please use the chat or raise hand feature to contribute or ask questions, which will be particularly helpful during our round robin later. We have swapped around our agenda just a little bit, so I want to tell you what our updated agenda is. Really, we're going to have Stu go first, Stu McKenzie with Birds Canada speak first about the Modus strategic plan and updates from Modus Central. Then I'll give a very brief 5-minute update on the Midwest Competitive State Wildlife Grant. That's what the CSWIG stands for. And then we'll go into about an hour of round robin introductions with brief updates. We're just going to do verbal updates for about 5 minutes. I have a few people lined up who I know are doing large scale projects in the Midwest. And then after that, we'll use the raise hand function so that we're not all tripping over ourselves, and I'll call on you. So when we get to that point, please raise your hand. If you have questions, please put them in the chat throughout our presentations. Okay, I will stop sharing. Stu is going to be co-presenter with me. So Stu, if you'd be willing to introduce yourself to the group, please.
Hi, everybody. You can hear me okay?
Yeah.
I am Stu McKenzie. I think I've met most of you already. You know who I am. I'm a Director of Strategic Assets at Birds Canada, which Modus is part of my portfolio. And I've been working on it since day one. And I get most of my inspiration from meetings like this, which reinforce that we're doing a good thing and trying to keep up with everybody. So thanks for coming, and I look forward to chatting with you this afternoon.
Thanks, Stu. No doubt it's a juggling act, and you all are, I'm sure, drinking from a fire hose. So I appreciate you taking the time to be here to walk us through this. I'm just going to do 2 poll questions really fast. So get ready on your Zoom to answer 2 questions. I'll give you time to read them. The answers are a bit lengthy, but the first one should show up on your screen and you can enter your answer. But what is your level of knowledge when it comes to Modus? I've deployed Modus stations and tags. I've deployed and maintained Modus stations only. I've deployed tags. I have plans to use Modus in the future. I've heard about it, but I haven't moved on it yet. I'm just curious and want to learn more. I'll give folks a few minutes or minute to fill that out. We have almost 60 people who have replied. We're almost there. 91%. So close. Okay, I'm going to close polling. Last chance. Okay, we're going to end poll. I'm going to share the results. Here they are. So we have a lot across the board, which is great. So we will get to use this data for future plans. But yeah, this is a great crowd. It looks like we have a lot of people who are just learning about it, and also folks who have gotten involved and deployed techs. Okay, let me go to the next question. Stephanie, oh, there it is. Okay, launch second poll. Where does your main interest with Modus lie? Whether you're doing things now or in the future, you have future plans, please indicate which one you're most interested in. Local tracking using Modus tags, tracking migratory movements, Modus station placement and maintenance for the greater good and for other people using Modus and tagging, using Modus stations and tags in current research, and planning to use Modus stations and tags in the next year or two. Give me a few minutes. I actually know of a few people on this call who can't be there for the whole call because they're installing Modus stations, which is great. Okay, 86%, 88. Okay, this one's kind of across the board as well. Okay, sharing results. So a lot of folks are interested in migratory movements, 68%, and then station placement and maintenance, which is great. Okay, thank you guys for helping us with that. Next, I will turn it over to Stu, who's going to talk to us about the Modus strategic plan and updates from Modus Central. So we have Stu for the next 25 minutes.
25.
25, if it's less. Okay. Take it away.
So first of all, I'll just share my screen here. I'd like to keep this as open as possible. So if you have any questions, please chime in, or I'll try and keep up with the chat. Can you see my presentation? Okay.
I see your notes.
Yeah, I'll get there.
Now I see presenter view.
Thank you.
There you go. Great, perfect.
Awesome. So for your viewing pleasure, well, a bit of a background. For the last year and change, Birds Canada, along with other partners, have been developing a strategic plan for Modus. You can follow this QR code, or you can type that link. I'll also put it in the chat. Or Stephanie or Sarah, do you mind popping in the chat for me?
Yep.
I'd ask that if you do go here, that you keep it confidential for now. We're one iteration away from the final version, and we don't want things to leak around, but you can consider this a sneak preview. And if you do have any feedback or questions, please feel free to reach out to me, and I'll provide some contact information a little bit later. So what I'm going to go over today is basically just an introduction and discussion about the strategic plan, sort of our strategic objectives for the next decade. So like Modus is a consortium, everybody knows it's a collaboration. All projects have their specific objectives, but by its nature, we're all working together, whether we like it or not. And for capacity building, fundraising, networking, and maximizing the efficacy for conservation, there's a lot of benefits to those embarking on the system to be doing so under a guiding light or a strategic plan. So much of the reason for this is an internal one from Birds Canada's perspective, in terms of being able to fundraise and build the capacity to support the system. But when writing it, we were hoping that it will enable all of our partners and collaborators to use it for their own benefit, to to support their own projects or fundraising in any capacity. The plan is quite ambitious and has a lot of elements, and it's not to be assumed that Birds Canada will be pursuing all and leading on all of those elements. There's infinite ways in which all collaborators, partners can contribute to and have a leadership role in different aspects of the plan. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to give us a summary of the plan, and again, I'll reiterate if you have any questions in the chat, or just like interrupt me at any time. So this is all repetitive, but it's always nice to look at pretty maps. So Modus is an international collaborative research network that conducts research and education on the ecology or conservation of migratory animals, or some iteration of the same description. And I described as well what the plan is doing. And we also recently just updated some of our infographics, which are available on the website for your use and customization, should you choose or like to use them for signage or just for your outreach. We don't have a template that you can customize yourself, but if you would like to pursue some customization with logo placement or highlighting anything specifically, just get in touch and we can help with that. So Modus, I'm going to gloss over a lot of the details of the how, but a lot of this how is present within the strategic plan, because it has to reach all audiences. So very, very similar to the attendees on this call, we have some people that are just here to learn more about what's happening, or even what the system is, all the way up to advanced users, and then you have funders, or agency or support networks that are reaching into the plan to see what's going on or what our plan is. So we have to sort of start at all levels. And this is sort of the best schematic that we've come up with so far, which is receivers are deployed by independent groups. The tags are deployed for specific research questions. It's all stored in the centralized data repository and portal. We have augmented research outputs, and this increases the research and conservation impacts as a whole. And this is a modification of a paper by Crew et al. And PLOS One a while ago that examined Modus more on a philosophical, conceptual level as it pertains to how a system like this would work in Australia. So I have to give credit there for the initial. And we've come a long way since, just for funsies. On the left is a snapshot of a whiteboard at Western University when we were trying to design and name Modus. And since that time, we've come a long way to now having close to 1,500 stations, having tagged north of 300 species. The numbers here are a little bit dated, and well over 30,000 animals within the database, and well over 500 projects now that have used the system. And so this is, as I said right off the hop, really inspired us to develop a strategy leading us to 2030. And I have to acknowledge and thank the Richard King Mellon Foundation, the Weston Family Foundation, for support of the strategy, and then Willistown Conservation Trust through the Northeast Modus collaboration for their leadership, and Bird Conservancy of the Rockies as well in helping us to develop this plan. And I should mention that this is this was done with a lot of taking feedback from many meetings like this that happen throughout the hemisphere, and some more dedicated outreach that we've been doing over the past few years. So the strategy at a glance is to enable a vision that Modus is a global research network delivering critical information to help conserve smaller flying animals. That's kind of our greatest niche. And within that vision, there's 4 goals. The first is to enable conservation, contribute pioneering science. That's both on the technologies, well, that kind of overlaps with innovating technology integration below, and then building community. And there's a lot of gray areas and funny fuzzy lines, because one of the best tools to enable conservation is to build a community. But when you're writing these plans, you have to draw lines somewhere. And then each of those goals we've broken down into objectives and milestones, and I'll go through each of those individually. So just to reiterate, basically what I'm just doing now is just sharing with everybody what the plan looks like, and then you can, when the final version comes out, you can dive into it a little bit more deeply. So An example of enacting conservation is ensuring that the data that's being used, is being published, that the tools are available to ensure maximum use of the data, and then that data is being used for the benefit of conservation. And that there's some fuzzy lines where whose responsibility is it to enact the conservation? Is it on our part as Modus? Is it on your part as partners, or is it on the part of agencies or decision makers to take the data? And I think it's a combination of all of our responsibilities. One example, a good example, is that of the barn swallow. We've been, Evans et al. Used Modus data to examine the survival of barn swallows in the post-breeding period. So this is the survival of fledglings after they leave the nest and they lose independence from their parents. And when you break it all down, the survival in the post-breeding period for barn swallows in Ontario is about 42%, which translates to about a female barn swallow having to reproduce 3 times before replacing herself. So that's a measurement of survival throughout the annual cycle, through one stage of the annual cycle. And then obviously we have other, you have to examine migration and the breeding period and the overwintering period to start to get a full picture of that, and taking it the next level to actually enact conservation. And another example is highlighting this early paper that was monumental in the expansion of Modus by Camila Gomez. Really highlighted the importance of the north coast of Colombia for migratory, in this case, great sheet thrushes, but for many other species as well, where the amount of fat they accrued in Colombia determined both the pace and the distance they were able to fly throughout their entire migration. It just so happens that's also one of the most biodiverse regions on the planet, which is from a conservation perspective, a huge boom for a buck. So how do we translate and ensure that our data is available to the best capacity from science, but then it gets connected to conservation? So some of the strategies that we've been exploring or would like to do that to ensure that the Modus data is widely used to inform conservation decision-making is to increase institutional partnerships. So, and a lot of these are strategic planning, very vague terms, but we need to have some idea of measurable goals that we can work toward. So from a Modus central perspective, agreements with 5 major conservation agencies by 2027, and whether they're at the agencies within the Department of Interior in the United States or Environment Canada or other decision makers in Canada, or any of which in Mexico, Central America, or South America, that may drive conservation using Modus as a tool in one way or another. Another objective is to cement Modus as a primary tool for conservation delivery, and then 10 agencies or coalitions integrate Modus into decision-making by 2025. Sarah and Steph, just a heads up, if I'm coming up on time, just let me know and I can skip. This shouldn't take too long, I don't think. And then the last is to engage large new audiences through outreach and storytelling. And that's a vague way of saying education. So enabling the use and access of data from the system to 50 institutions and 500,000 users of the public using these tools by 2026. If we do have a chance for discussion or later, I'll just keep notes. Pioneering science, again, this is a responsibility or where it largely falls on the collaborators and the scientists that are using Modus to deliver pioneering science in all aspects of animal ecology. I don't want to just limit it to birds, although birds are obviously our focus, but bats and insects have a very high profile in this. The citation's missing. But Nathan Cooper and Pete Mara's work on Kirtland's Warbler is a great example, but almost everybody involved in the system. As soon as I hate using names in this, because then I look at the list of esteemed people on this call, and everybody, there's many contributions to pioneering science that should be highlighted. So creates the first sort of objective here is to create discipline leading science opportunities. One of the metrics for that is to determine mechanisms of population change for 10 species by 2029. And the sort of barn swallow example is one And Kirtland's Warbler is another great example of how it can be used. The second objective, thanks Sarah for the link there, develop industry-leading data services delivered through Modus Central. And those are aspects that we're working on sort of continuously to make sure the data is clean and accessible, metadata and detection data. This metric is a little bit tricky. User satisfaction rating of 95%. We don't currently have a way to measure that, and I don't think we're not quite there. So that one is one of the examples where we're tweaking the language here to make it a bit more realistic before we release the plan entirely. And then the last thing we would like to goal in here is to advance open data frameworks. And much of the Modus data, the public-facing data, the basic detection data is open by default within Modus, but we would like 80% of collaborators to, well, we ideally like all collaborators to agree to some degree of open data by 2027. But that's going to be a process that there's a lot of give and take in open data negotiations. But that is one of those steps we need to take to maximize the efficacy, is to make the data as available as possible to whoever needs it. So that's sort of the concept behind the pioneering science. The system drives fundamental advances in movement ecology. And this is just an example of what Modus looks like when we all work together. This is well dated because right now the map, I need to update it because it looks, it's a lot less Eastern biased right now, but this is actually well over a year old. I need to update it. So props to Midwest and Western folks that building community. That little GIF there's one of my favorites. That was the first Modus station to go up in Baja, in the Baja region of Mexico. So with Link Community, a strong intercontinental network built on local capacity. Modus is not a top-down scenario. It's very much a bottom-up scenario, and the strength of the system relies on local capacity and local communities champions to drive the system forward, to drive the success of projects locally, but then also, and then regionally, as in the case of this workshop here, and then cumulatively that leads to national and international objectives. So one of the goals is to establish an international network of regional coordination groups. Much of that work is underway, and this is case in point through this group here. And we'd like to have 15 networked regional coordination groups by 2029. This plan is also very Western Hemisphere biased. There's a European, African, Australian, there's a lot going on in the rest of the world that does fit into aspects of the plan, but in terms of implementation, the Western Hemisphere is by far where there's more regional coordination and momentum that fits within the plan. The other objective there is to empower collaborators and foster champions. And the definition of a champion is a little loose. You know, we could consider everybody on this call champions. Sarah is certainly a champion. You could consider myself a champion. I'm just looking at the list of names I see now, so I don't want to. I'm looking only at champions actually at the moment. Allison Bird, Rich Keith, and Chris Tonner are just the names I see, and everybody's champion. So, but we would like, 100 champions spread across the 30 countries by 2028, and that's really people that are driving initiatives locally, regionally, and nationally to have it, to get maximum use and benefits of the system. And we'd also, the last one is to establish Modus intersections with Indigenous priorities. And this is one of the areas where we need the most work. We've done a lot of work, but most of it has been in collaboration with, and less so being led by or matching Indigenous priorities. And that's something that we're looking forward to working with communities more closely to develop. And the last one is innovating technology. So as everybody, I hope your team does well too, Chris. Innovating technology. So as most people will know, Modus kind of got its birth through the development of sensor gnomes. Low-tech has its own gear, and cellular tracking technologies has come on the scene. And we have a a myriad of technology options, but that adds a lot of complications to how we're trying to operate. So we're looking to simplify and innovate to make the system, to lower barriers to entry to the system and make it easier for everybody to use, and affordable as well. So there's a variety of receivers that cover the technology basis. There's a variety of tags that cover the innovating technology, and this these suite of goals in particular are driven largely by the manufacturers, but there is room for innovation and collaboration with all the partners as well. So the goal is to provide industry-leading standards that prioritize the user community, and that's what I mean, like affordability, accessibility, and transparency in terms of what's happening within those little black boxes. And so those related goals are to foster innovation with the technology partners. And we're working closely with Low-Tech and CTT and some others, and hoping to work toward a collaborative framework of cutting-edge tag and receiver types. And that's about as specific as I can be at the moment. But suffice it to say that how we're doing things, largely how Modus was developed, was taking existing technologies and making them work in a collaborative framework, as opposed to developing a technology that builds and drives the collaborative framework. And it would be really nice for all the technology to be speaking and working together in a way that removes a lot of the barriers that we have to deal with on the database and data management side. The next is to improve best practices in infrastructure and tag deployment. A lot of this has to do with training, capacity building, and resource development. One example is I have a growing distaste for pop-up stations, just because they're temporary and very temperamental, but they're very useful in certain applications. So sort of driving the resources and the information so that we can set up as many robust stations as possible that are, permanent on the landscape, and then also connected to the internet, and then tag impacts quantified so that we can sort of improve best practices, improve manuals, improve the resources that are available to researchers. There's a lot of material for bander training. There's much less material available for tag training, and it's a little bit more nuanced. You can't learn it from a book, but those are examples of the types of best practices and resources that are included in that aspect of the plan. And then the last is to integrate emerging technologies. And so in order for Modus to remain, Modus will always remain relevant, but the more we can integrate new technologies or new data types, the more information and the more impact we can have towards science and conservation. So the goal there is either 5 new tracking or environmental data types supported in one way or another by 2026. And that could be something that's not necessarily tracking, but meteorological data, or quick links between Modus data and meteorological data, for example, not specifically things like geologging or biologging, any type of environmental data, or making those linkages better known. So I'm well under time here, I hope, but what I wanted to do is provide you with that broad overview of what the plan entails, and I look forward to sharing with you. Please don't distribute the link that we've shared with you here. That was just for discussion purposes at this time, and we look forward to sharing it more broadly in the near future, probably by the end of summer. And I sort of wrapped in some of the larger Modus central updates within the plan, because it touches on a lot of the higher level objectives that we're trying to work on everybody's behalf. I think the most relevant, I'm happy to address any specific questions, or if any issues come up on the rest of the call. I think the most immediately relevant update that we have to provide is that we've entered into a partnership with American Bird Conservancy to develop a position called currently Motus US director, probably be called something similar to that. And we've hired said individual, as you may have seen the advertisements for it. We've hired the individual, but we can't make the announcement yet. So coming this fall, we'll announce who that individual is and the framework under which they'll be working to try and to harmonize all of the work. And one of their primary work objectives is to how simple is that? The strategic plan is basically their work plan. So do that is the job description, and at least as it pertains to the United States. So we're very excited to establish that position and enable them to really start working for you. So you can learn more about Modus, and here's some resources, the main contact, and you can join us on Slack as well. And then we're trying to centralize as much info as possible. So Modus is very diffuse and there's info everywhere. And the more we can kind of bring it together, the better. So I think that's enough of my rambling for now, but I'm happy to discuss or address any questions that I may have made you think about. So thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Stu. We have a minute or two if folks have questions about the strategic plan, but otherwise we will go on ahead. But if folks have questions, please put them in the chat. We'll just take a few seconds, see if anybody has anything. In the meantime, I will put a link in the chat for a Google form. Don't go there yet. I'll put it at the end too. I wanted to make sure I got it before any people had to leave early. But this Google form survey, it's not really a survey, it would just take 2-3 minutes. But really it's inputting your contact information to build a Midwest-wide kind of database of contacts so that when people cold call me and are just interested in Modus, I can try and point them to someone in their state or nearby who can help with some of the technical expertise. If you don't feel comfortable providing that technical expertise, just put it in the survey. So we're trying to build that contact list in addition to gauging people's expertise and knowledge levels, which is great, and how to help you better. Ethan has a question for you, Stu. It says, can you articulate on a vision for what data sharing in the future will look like?
Yeah, and then Carl had that one was direct to me, but hope you don't mind, Carl, that I address it publicly. So the vision for what data sharing will look like is open. But with caveats. So we understand the need to keep certain data private. We understand individual projects need or desire to keep data under wraps until it's been able to worked up or published. So within certain caveats, the concept is that it will be open and easily searchable and accessible for whoever wants it. But all those features are customizable by the PI, and you can do that now. You can go onto the Modus website, your project, and determine what level of openness you want. So you can make your data wide open right now. It's just not fully implemented. And in the future, we'll be discussing an update to the collaboration policy that may make this sort of a mandatory requirement after 3 or 5 years, where it just becomes open automatically. So we need to work on that. So I don't know if that answers your question, at least at a high level, Ethan. I'm happy to get into it in more detail. Anyway, I'll go through the questions here, and you can just cut me off whenever you want, Sarah, and then I can try and address them in the chat if we run out of time. Carl asked if there's a funding plan to accompany the strategic plan, and that's something that we're working on internally, and we haven't included as part of the plan, primarily because it's so difficult and very scalable. So like the range of a cost of a station, for instance, ranges from like $2,000 or $3,000 on the extremely low end, a receiver and one antenna, to $15,000 or $20,000 on the high end. So if you include that breadth of like so from a strategic planning perspective, if you're talking about 100 or 200 stations strategically in some areas, your budget may vary from 1 to 30 million. So it's a really tough thing to nail down. And then the staffing of it all, how much of that is collective. So that the cumulative investment of Modus is many tens of millions. So do you do you try to capture all of the investments cumulatively, like all the tags, all the students, all the projects, all the collaborators, or do you just focus on Modus Central? So in answer to your question, yes, there is a costing plan. It's very complicated, which is one of the reasons why we've kept it kind of under wraps and for the time being are focusing on our fundraising needs to maintain Modus Central. And it'll be more of the regional groups or hopefully regional coordination networks that can deal with funding scenarios within their areas. Or specific projects that may need, we may need 5 million for this project, and that's what we're going. Most of our discussion or what the strategic plan has allowed us to do is to talk in terms of 7, 8 digit numbers and leaving 6, 5, and 4 digit numbers. It's the idea is to elevate it to like physics level type investment in biodiversity and conservation, and that's sort of what we'd like to strive through. When I say physics level, it's like 50 million for a telescope isn't unheard of, so why not 50 million for birds? And I'm waiting for Sarah to cut me off.
You're cut off. No, you have a minute.
I am cut off. I have a minute.
Yeah, well, you have a minute or two if you have other questions that you want to answer first.
Yeah, I'm just trying to decipher private messages from.
I understand.
I can't help you there. I think I addressed the questions that are in the hopper.
Okay.
Right now.
Cool. Okay, well then we'll kind of move into our round robin session. We have a lot of people on the call, so I had to set up a few people. I'll start out. I don't want people to drop off in case they have to leave, so I will just mention that I do plan on reaching out to this group with a doodle poll to plan a winter brainstorming session to identify priority species that we may want to move forward on a region-wide tagging effort. To tag species across their breeding ranges rather than just state by state or group by group, to try and broaden those efforts and put our heads together. So stay tuned, and I will be reaching out to you to find a time that may work, probably in December or January. So I will go first just to update the group very briefly on our competitive state wildlife grant that we were awarded in 2020. The grant included 59 new Modus stations in the Midwest, in 8 states in the Midwest, and in 3 countries, Mexico, Costa Rica, and Colombia. And it also helped support 3 research projects that had to do with Modus tagging, which included Amber Roth at the University of Maine doing golden wing warbler tagging, Kristen Hall at Minnesota DNR tagging American kestrels and putting up stations, and then Missouri Department of Conservation, who I worked for, and Selva working to tag 50 golden wing warblers and wood thrush, 25 tags each, pre-spring migration to get detections as they moved north. So it was a big grant. It was very exciting. Of the 59 stations funded for placement in the CSWIG, we've placed 43. So supply shortages due to COVID have really delayed some of our material orders, including antennas and other parts. But we hope that a big number of these remaining 16 stations will be placed either in the next month or at very least by spring. It's been driving me kind of crazy because I can't control supply issues for antennas. So we're working around that here in Missouri. As far as the 3 research projects on the Selva and MDC objective, with many partners down south, including Ernesto and Paz, who are on this call. I must say that on the CSWIG, there were 9 other partners on the CSWIG. Many of you are on this call, which is great to not see you all on Zoom. So it was a very big effort. But of this Selva and MDC objective of tagging golden wings and wood thrush, Selva was responsible for placing 7 stations, 4 in Colombia and 3 in Costa Rica. All should be up and running this month, I think, including one that Ernesto and Paz are placing right at this very moment. With 25 golden wing tags, 18 were deployed in Costa Rica, 5 in Nicaragua, and 1 in Colombia. With wood thrush, 11 in Costa Rica and 12 in Nicaragua. So to date, these tag birds have generated close to 40 detections away from the original tagging site pre-spring migration. And wood thrush tags programmed to last over a year, so there should be plenty more detections to come. So very exciting developments there with our competitive state wildlife grant. Kristen Hall with Minnesota DNR couldn't be here today, but she provided an update that they have deployed. Their objective was to tag 50 American kestrels and place 10 Modus stations in Minnesota. So they've deployed 25 transmitters on kestrels this season in 3 different study areas, and they've deployed 50 tags so far over the last few years. She said this has led to peer-reviewed manuscripts on kestrels, both using local and long-distance tracking. Many of them have been detected on Missouri stations as they come south, which is very cool, and the use of Modus. So they're working to publish on that. That's really the update of the CSWIG I have. I will go through a few folks I have set up to do round robins. We want to do verbal updates, just about 5 minutes, but I wanted to touch on some of the folks who I know are doing large scale tagging, just so others on the call can, we're trying to use this as a networking session so other people can get folks' names and locations, and then hear a little bit about some of the big efforts if you're interested in folding in. I put my email in the chat. You're also welcome to contact me whenever or ask about someone who was on the call and how to get in touch with them. So I will first start with Amber Roth. Amber, I don't know if I saw Amber on here. Maybe I did.
Yes, I am here.
There she is. I don't see anybody. Nobody has their video on. Turn your video on if you.
I am recovering from being sick, so
okay.
I'm gonna leave my video off if you don't mind.
No,
if I don't know if I have screen sharing powers. I was gonna say I would share some slides if I can be granted screen sharing powers, but
let me try to do that.
I think Stephanie,
yeah, you're a co-host. You should be able to.
I think we are all set now. No, for some reason, no, I wasn't able to, but
okay.
I'm good now. All right, you see a title slide?
Yes.
Super. All right. So I know there wasn't an expectation to have slides, but I just gave a presentation about this project on Friday. So I had slides at my fingertips. So thought visuals are always kind of nice to talk about. So Sarah mentioned that we have a golden wing warbler nanotagging project as part of the CSWIG grant. And so I wanted to give a little bit of an update about how that project is going. So just a little bit of background, if I can advance my slides. So golden wing warbler is a species of high urgency on the Road to Recovery initiative kind of urgency line here. Many people know golden wing warbler is a species in decline. There are 2 regions where most of the population is found, in the Great Lakes and the Appalachians. It's a species that is identified as being very important for conservation on just about every list. And some contributing factors to decline include habitat loss, hybridization with blue wings, and potentially poor overwinter survival, which is where this project comes in, is trying to explore that. So what we are trying to do is create an integrated population model for golden wing warbler. And an important piece of understanding populations is looking at adult survival, which is kind of the component I've circled here in red. And one issue that we have with golden wing warblers is we can detect males pretty readily. They have high sight fidelity, they sing, they're visual, they're easy to find year after year, but the females are much harder to find. And so what we wanted to do is try to come up with a method for improving detectability of adult females so that we can better estimate their annual survival, which we've been really struggling to get good estimates on. So, oops, one too many clicks. So here in northern Wisconsin, you'll see pictures of 2 Modus stations being installed. That was part of the CSWIG money, was to kind of increase that network in the northern Great Lakes. And we also obviously we're deploying nanotags on golden wing warblers in that area. So that gives you kind of an idea of where we're working. This is what they look like. Here's a female golden wing warbler on the right with a nanotag ready to go. These are leg loop harnesses. If anybody has questions about how we attach tags, please feel free to follow up with me. And last year was the first year we deployed nanotags. We deployed 82 of them. Not all of these were funded with CSLIG money, but some of the nanotags are. But it's just nice to kind of see the full picture of everything we've deployed. And we've deployed tags in 3 states, including Wisconsin. And we installed 3 Modus stations, the 2 that I just mentioned in Wisconsin. And this is the preliminary return rate information for this current field season. So we went back out this spring, looked for these tag birds, and tried to find them. We also had males that are controls that just have color bands on them because we wanted to see if there was an effect of the tagging itself. So you can compare the control males to tag males, and you can see that the return rates are very similar. So at least for males, there do not appear to be a tag effect. However, when you look at females, we had very few females come back, none in the Appalachians and only 2 out of 20 in Wisconsin. So there's either a tag effect that's different for females than for males, or in fact, we're really seeing low annual survival for females. They're not returning from the wintering grounds for whatever reason. So moving to this field season in terms of deployments. So with a big influx of funding and also a bunch of wonderful collaborators throughout the Golden Wing Warbler breeding range, we've really expanded our tag deployments. And you can kind of see all the dots on the map. So we have deployed 180 nanotags, pretty even between the 2 regions. We did a little better with males than females, which is expected, but we're pretty pleased with the number of tags we were able to put out this spring. So we'll be heading back out in a year and seeing who returns and see what that adult female return rate looks like, and see if it in fact does look like the survival rate's going to be lower. And we did, as a side note, shorten the antennas a little bit this year to a point where we could still get good detectability from the receivers. So we did everything we could to try to minimize any effect the tags might have. So we'll see if that makes any difference, or it might just be that females are having a rough time over winter. So if people have questions, I'm happy to answer those. Oh, I forgot to mention, we do have some Modus detections of birds detected at partner, other partners in the network, the Midwest Migration Network. So this is the Western Great Lakes Bird and Bat Observatory stations where this particular male was sighted or detected. This male was detected near Goose Pond, north of Madison. We've had a Tennessee bird that was detected in Columbia, I think at one of Nick Bailey's stations. So anyway, this is our funding and collaborators that have made all this possible, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Amber. That's a great update. I think Allie has a question in the chat. If you wouldn't mind answering it in the chat, that would be great.
Yep, I can follow up with her after. Yep.
Great. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much. A great effort. I'm going to call next on Ann Mckeller. She has to leave here in a few minutes, and Ann has done a lot of tagging on black terns. I keep seeing her black terns being detected on our Missouri station. And we've actually never met Ann before, so welcome. And if you could give folks a little update on what you guys are doing with your tagging, what you're trying to learn. And I know it's a lot to cover in a short amount of time, but thanks for being here.
Sure, thanks. Nice to meet you. And thanks for inviting me to give a little update here. So I'm a research scientist with Environment and Climate Change Canada, located in Saskatchewan. And in the past, I've done quite a bit of work tagging shorebirds here in collaboration with the University of Saskatchewan and Christy Morrissey. We tagged a bunch of sanderling. That stuff is all mostly published now. And for shorebirds, I'm looking to move into some studies on Wilson's phalaropes in the next couple of years. But for the black terns, we've been tagging individuals in 2021 and 2022. So we're kind of interested in two things here. We want to learn a bit more about migratory connectivity in this species, but it became pretty apparent to us early on that they have very low site fidelity, which makes it challenging to use something like geolocators because we don't recapture many of these birds. So our idea here with Modus is to get some information on migration, but also we're using, I think similar to what Amber was saying, the longer battery life tags to try to get information on when these birds come back and kind of where they disperse to. Sort of with limited success so far. I think we might run into some issues of the sort of saltwater habitats that these birds are using in the wintertime, degrading the tags, but I think it's sort of a little too early to tell there. But yeah, we've got some great detections of birds coming through through the flyway down through a lot of detections in Missouri, which is exciting. I just want to mention real quick that we did have a bunch of issues from our tags last year, a bunch of false detections in Ontario and Quebec. I don't know if there's just a few problematic towers there. And I've gotten a lot of emails from people saying like, whoa, your black terns are doing something really cool. It's like they go south and then they immediately go over to the Atlantic flyway and then they come back and I have to keep telling people like, no, these are false detections. We're going to have to filter those things out. But as for this year, the tracks seem a lot cleaner and more realistic. And so, yeah, I guess time will tell whether we can actually get decent information on breeding dispersal using this technique. But at the very least, we're getting some more information about their migration. So, yeah, that's about it for me.
Great. Thanks, Anne. Appreciate that. Next, I'm going to move to Chris Tondra. Chris, is it also say where you work and if you could give us a brief update. I know with all your Modus work, it's to be hard to cram it in 5 minutes, but please go ahead, Chris. Thanks.
Oh, sure. So hi, everybody. I'm Chris Tondra. I'm at Ohio State. Amber made me look bad because I didn't make any slides. So yeah, I've had a number of projects with Modus over the years. A bunch published on rusty blackbirds, work Jay Wright did for his master's. And so just to update on what we have going on currently, I mean, the pandemic was not kind to our towers. So Zoe Corpy, who's currently a master's student with me, who came from the Northeast Modus collaboration, has just been a dynamo with getting our array back up and running, which primarily is on the south shore of Lake Erie, the portion of the shoreline in Ohio. So we now are pretty much back up to where we were and even a little better because we've got more coverage of the lakeshore. So we, including our inland towers, I think we have about 13 towers up currently. And the main project we're working on, Zoe's project, is we're looking at lake crossing behavior of migrants primarily during spring migration, but we'll hopefully get data on fall migration as well. So we're tagging songbirds, 5 different species in southern Ohio. And then this is in collaboration with BSBO and the field station at LeMay with Matt Schumar and Molly McDermott. So we are tagging those birds south and then seeing how many of them ultimately cross Lake Erie and what's the distribution of where they are crossing. And our hope is we can, to some extent, map risk of collisions with any proposed offshore wind turbines in Lake Erie. So we don't have any, we're getting detections. We're really happy so far with the number of detections we've gotten, but we're still quality checking all that data. Zoe's working through it now, and also installing new stations. So the Division of Wildlife in Ohio has supported some additional stations and also updating our current stations to CTT sensor stations for more automated uploads, and also trying to update them to include the life tag frequency. So that's the biggest project we have going. We're also doing a project on fall departure dates in prothonotary warblers. And that's my another master's student of mine, Brian Suru, is leading that project. And that is kind of looking at trade-offs between breeding effort, timing of molt, and ultimately departure dates. And then we've gotten, some of what I love Stu refers to as gravy. In addition to the departure dates, we've gotten a number of detections of those birds. A few birds in Florida, which was kind of neat because a number of years ago with the prothonotary warbler working group, we had done a big deployment of geolocators. And that data suggested birds from Ohio were not going down the Mississippi flyway, that they were crossing over to the Atlantic flyway and going through Florida. And so far, the Modus data we've gotten has corroborated that geolocator data that our birds here in Ohio are indeed going through Florida as opposed to crossing the Gulf through the Gulf Coast states. So those are really the two main projects we have going on now. Yeah, it's going pretty well. So look for more from us in the future.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, no doubt in this winter brainstorming session, I will call heavily on you and Mike Ward and other people who I know have done a lot of tagging in the region, so that we kind of focus in on what species, if any, we can tag across the region and be more effective in their movements and what we all want to learn. Okay, thanks, Chris. Mike Ward, I'm going to call on you next if you're there to give an update.
I am here. I am in a hotel room at Fort Hood, Texas, where it's been 100 degrees for 54 days in a row, apparently. So,
oh my God. Well,
but yeah, so I can give you a quick update. So, we have some collaborations going on with Ariel Fortner, where we're tagging Virginia rails and SOAR rails. And we have erected 19 towers. My lab manager's on here, Mike Avera, he could correct me. And we have some other systems that can switch between looking at beaver tags, looking at Modus tags. And those are going to be used this fall to track northern saw-whet owls. So as they come down to Illinois, we're going to put on 20 of those and track those as they go back north, hopefully using the Modus system. And at the same time, use 6 systems in very close proximity to plot out their home ranges and their activity patterns as associates with lunar cycles. Another project we're associated with that you already mentioned, Sarah, is with Nathan and Haley Harridan. So Haley will be pursuing his master's at the U of I. And so even though I really do nothing, I do know that he tagged 52 juveniles or fledglings, Kirtland's warblers, and like maybe 54 adults this year. He's just a go-getter. And so those data are, he's being picked up by several towers. I also should mention that going back to the swords in Virginia, I'd like to thank several places north of us. So in Madison, in Minneapolis, in Iowa, with good detections. As with the black terns, we're having some situations where we get detections that we don't think are real, and we're working on trying to let people know, double checking on those things. And then finally, this is with Chris Tonra, that we have a lot of whippoorwill research going, and hopefully next year we're going to put on some Modus tags that last maybe over a year on whippoorwills to look at recruitment. And we're working down in Oaxaca and Chiapas. And we just had some discussions about maybe trying to get some Modus towers down there. And so I think I covered most of what I wanted to get across. I saw there's some questions or someone. Is there any questions?
No, not yet.
Okay. Well, another area where I was talking to Stu about in Puerto Rico is we have been experimenting with different types of antennas with different types of polarity, so horizontal and vertical, and different stacked and folded dipole antennas. And so I've been doing a very poor job at providing that information to the Modus group, because some of it would probably be of interest to certain people if they're interested in local versus more far directions. And I promise Stu that I will be better in the future at trying to convey that information to the larger group about the different antennas that are working well and the ones that aren't working so well for us.
Yeah, Mike's team has been really innovative in building their own antennas and trying a bunch of different ways to do Modus. So it's been really interesting. Okay, I'm going to call on Ernesto because he had his hand up and pause, and then it went away. So Ernesto and Paz are in Costa Rica, which is really neat because we've folded them in as international partners in a lot of our grants that we've done. And Ernesto and Paz, hey guys, are now the contacts for Central America to do Modus station placement. So go ahead, you two. Welcome.
Can you hear us? Our internet is not that superb up here, but we're actually at the moment here with Sebastian. We're putting up the third.
We can hear you, but you just muted yourself on accident.
Just right quick, Boss and I have been working with Modus for just over a year now. And well, we've helped out in several installations within Central America, within Costa Rica as well, and working closely with Selva and also with Sarah. And we helped tag the golden winged warblers and wood thrushes here in Costa Rica and Nicaragua. And last year we put tags on cerulean warblers, which is one of our main study species here in Costa Rica, where we have a big stopover site called Las Brisas Nature Reserve, and that's in the Central Caribbean. And this year, well, last year we deployed 12 tags and got really good stopover data, as well as 2 foreign detections, one in Panama and one in Colombia. And this year we'll be deploying another batch of transmitters on some manual telemetry to figure out where they're moving, how much land they're using, et cetera. So we've been really, I guess, enthralled with Modus ever since we found out about it. And with the help of Selva from Colombia, that we got the first station installed in Costa Rica, we just add as we speak.
You keep freezing a little bit. Oh, there you are. Okay. Well, we got the main points. I know that you're in a remote place, but we heard you, and thank you so much for being here and for doing everything that you both do in Costa Rica and Central America. Bob, you had your hand up. Bob Fisher, would you like to update the group?
Yeah, my question is sort of out of ignorance, and that is that is there any way to, you might say, collect Modus data at some of these major stopover points? Should there be more tower locations considered? The radar session, for example, last week had 2 major concentration points, one on the confluence of the Ohio and Mississippi River, and the other on the confluence of the Missouri and the Mississippi River. And I'm wondering if that would be a place to gather tagged bird data. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, and those are key locations, no doubt. We have about 3 stations or 4 very close to the confluence of the Missouri and the Mississippi. The Ohio is definitely an area that we need to add more stations to. But yeah, I do hope in the future to work across these Midwest Migration Network initiatives to better target areas that, yeah, through radar and other efforts we've found or that we're seeing are major thoroughfares for migration and where to be most strategic about both station placement, but also tagging. Stu, did you have any additions to that, or are you good?
Well, more, aside from just saying that more is almost always better. There's a built-in redundancy within the system. So to some extent, there's regional and local priorities into where things are going. But there isn't, as I said earlier, a top-down approach to ensure that we're covering all the hot spots. Although there's even some nuance there, because like Costa Rica and Panama, there is some top-down strategic intents to increase coverage in Central America and elsewhere. But like with respects to Ohio or specific regional areas, that's kind of up to regional groups' interest and priorities. And it's through chats and discussions like this that that raise awareness and get people interested and find momentum and funds to set up stations in areas of local interest. So I don't know if I really addressed the question per se, but that's my take.
Agree. Bob, did we answer your question? for the most part.
Yeah, I think so. As I say, it's so interesting to do these two programs one after the other from the perspective of the different ways and how you can look at the information from those different ways. The obvious follow-up question is, do we have enough banding stations to place transmitters on birds? Is that the other bottleneck, if you will?
I do think it is a bottleneck in terms of what Stu was talking about before with training, because whether we have enough banding stations, or folks at those banding stations, clearly they're more accustomed to handling birds, and that is seems like a great first step to reach out to those folks for training. But that's definitely been part of discussions of what the needs are for Modus into the future, and whether that's like a traveling road show of folks who know about Modus technicalities, whether that's station placement or tagging, putting tags on birds. There are certainly major learning curves for both of those things when it comes to Modus. And so I do hope to work better in the future to try and coordinate some of that information sharing in the Midwest in particular, and beyond where possible. But yeah, you've hit the nail on the head that there are certainly technical needs that we need for training, and also station placement. Okay, we definitely need more. Oh, go ahead, Bob. Do you have something else to add? No, sorry. Okay. All right, I'm going to ask Lisa Kijik or Allison, sorry to call you out here, but with the Northeast Modus collaboration, if you'd like to give just a brief update on what's going on in the Northeast. I know there's a lot going on in the Northeast, but if one of you would be willing to chime in and let folks know, that'd be great. There's Lisa.
Oh, Sarah, that's putting us on the spot.
I know, sorry. Nobody else is raising their hand. You guys gotta raise your hand. Get brave.
I feel like I'm back in school where I was trying to hide when I didn't do my homework.
Lisa.
Yeah, it's been incredible. The AOS conference was incredible, and I think it really showed how important Modus is to other areas, and the ability for it to build capacity for a lot of organizations. We always talk about, I know somebody asked about fundraising, but Modus has been the easiest science project I've ever had for fundraising, because it applies to engineers and a lot of different people who don't typically give to wildlife conservation. So the education piece is being worked on, but we just got our third competitive state wildlife grant, which means the Southeast region is going to be built up, probably adding at least 45 stations in the next 3 years. And what's pretty cool, again, back to the fundraising part, is we've put up over 120 stations since 2017, which sounds crazy, and it is. But now we're like, now what do we do? And Allison, I don't know if you have that map handy. We've created this incredible. Allison and Dave Brinker have created this incredible maintenance map, because that's where we're at now. We have to maintain all these stations, and we primarily use the sensor stations where we can, because they hook up to the cellular network when it's available, and so we can actually look at the health of our network on a weekly basis or bi-weekly basis. And I'll just let Allison show you. This is really cool. So we're kind of in the maintenance mode, whereas a lot of people are still in the building mode. But what's neat is now a lot of researchers are starting to utilize this network. So I'm going to turn that to Allison real quick, if you have a few minutes just to listen about how we're going to maintain all this.
Couldn't figure out how to unmute while I was sharing my screen. Sorry. Yeah, so this is just our maintenance map, where we are a team where we have to coordinate between, about 10 of us and 3 different teams who are separated into different regions, but we're all one solid team that communicates on a regular basis. So we sort of just established this way to visually see what's going on with all of our stations all the time, where we can look at, we are tracking a lot of these stations through the live health database that on CTT's website, so we can see if they're connected, and on modus.org to see if they're delivering data. So remotely, we can just see if they're connected and working right. And when they're maybe not connecting regularly or something suspicious, we'll look at them and turn them yellow for a little while and just watch them. Or if there's something that's not in dire need to be fixed, we can make notes. And so everything can be changed in this Google's just gets better and better all the time, I tell you. We can edit it all and change all of our fields and add notes to each other so that we don't have to constantly send 100 emails a day. We can all just look at what's going on a daily basis and turn things red when things need to be fixed immediately, so that with the responsibility of trying to keep all of these stations active for the greater network, we want to make sure that we're keeping them live as long as possible and as frequently as possible, especially for migrations. That's essentially what our map does.
That's really useful. It's so lucky that you guys have so many of those stations under one umbrella of your organization through all of the grants. I have a map like this through Google for Missouri stations, but I can't imagine trying to build a Midwest one and try and keep that updated with everybody's on there, but it sure would be helpful. But thank you guys. Your coordination and ability to get things done is always amazing.
And the Caribbean's building up their network really well. They have at least 6 stations going in over the next few months in Barbados, Jamaica, Bahamas, Puerto Rico. So, you know, I don't know if the Midwest birds go down that way that often, but
some do, some species, yeah, and some species of interest like prairie warblers and things like that that are priority species in the Midwest. So there is definitely opportunities there. Yeah, there was just for context for everybody, there was a Modus workshop that Lisa and Allison and the Northeast Modus collaboration put together with Modus to talk about the strategic plan, but also to provide a forum for people across the world, really, who were there to talk about more coordination and station placement and opportunities like that. So I know I made a few contacts that were very, very helpful in moving forward, especially international sites. So if you've opened that Google form and that survey, there is a question about international station placement. I do want to continue to have that be part of our Midwest discussion, just because it's not just the Midwest, right? Nothing about Modus is just where you are. And we do want to really encourage trying to find productive avenues to get funds and support to international partners to put up stations on migratory routes and the wintering grounds, because that's just as, if not more important than, if that's what we're trying to learn. It's one part of what we're trying to learn is where birds are going and where they're stopping over. Then clearly we need more stations down south, which I know that a lot of great partners are working on. Anna, go ahead, please.
Great, thanks. So I was part of the Midwest Weekly that Sarah mentioned, and we initially said that we were going to put up 5 stations. We were surprised that we could stretch our budget, and we've already put up 7 stations, and we've got an 8th on the way this fall still. So we'll have 8 stations out of that grant. But I just wanted to touch on the kind of local funding and excitement from the public piece of things. So in Iowa, we have a really unique situation where every single county has their own county conservation board, and lots of them have nature centers. There's also, Audubon groups around the state, and so, just sharing with these county conservation boards that this technology exists and showing those cool maps that you can see on the Modus website. This is something that, for $5,000, someone could get on board and say, this is a really important thing that we can add to our education focus. And then you get another station, another permanent location in your state. So it's really caught on. And so there's a lot of people that have been really excited about funding Modus at a local level. And so we have, I think, 8 stations coming on board this fall or next spring, just through through local funding. So I no longer have funding through my grants or through the state, but I'm still kind of chipping away at it, and we're getting lots of people who are excited to locally fundraise with friend groups or Audubon chapters or whatever it may be. So if it's within your realm and your wheelhouse to reach out to those kind of more local partners, that can be a really great way to just increase the stations in your area.
Thank you for chiming in and saying that, Anna. That's such an important point to make. Reaching out to local folks that have those small chunks of money aren't very small when it comes to Modus, because you can do so much with it. We've had that experience as well in Missouri. We've raised over $30,000 from private donations for Modus stations. So that's been really great. Just a few months ago, I reached out to local Audubon chapters, asking them to donate like $5,000 a piece to help support some tagging of ceruleans, looking at overwinter survival with Selva. And they delivered. They have heard enough about the Modus in Missouri that they know the background of it, they know its value. And so, yeah, if you're looking for funding and you have the expertise and you want to learn more about placing Modus stations, don't underestimate, those small stations. That's great. Nice, Amber, that's a good contribution. Yeah, that I know Amber has tried to raise a lot of money across a lot of different partners across the entire range of work that she's trying to do. And you've had a lot of people pile on just to support existing projects like that by piling on and purchasing tags, single and in groups. So that's great. All right, unless people raise their hands, I'm going to show you some really cool stuff from our golden wing tagging. So hold on, I got to share my screen. Okay. All right, here's our partners. Does this look real that Ernesto was there? We worked with Nick Bailey with Selva and Ernesto and Paz, who you just saw speaking to us from Costa Rica. And clearly we couldn't have done this tagging without all these partners. I was only down there for a week, but it was a great week. Trying to tag as many golden wings and wood thrush as we could. And we found some really cool returns on those. You can see here the nano tag on the golden wing. This was down in Costa Rica. And then we got detections a few months later. This is the bird affectionately named El Gordo by Ernesto and Paz, and he was detected in southern Missouri. And I can't tell you what the odds are of being down there for just a week, tagging 4 or 5 golden wings just in the few days that I was there. And then weeks later, seeing detections of birds that Ernesto and Paz had tagged and birds that we had processed when we were down there just over a few days being detected in Missouri and in the Midwest with the detections at stations that were funded by the competitive state wildlife grant in the Midwest. This was another bird. This is the exact bird that had this track from March 5th to the end of or May up here in Missouri. And it's just, we processed 4 or 5 birds and the bird was detected in Missouri. Then a week later in southern Missouri, you see there in the Ozarks, and then a week later, that same bird was detected on the Columbia Audubon Society sponsored Motus station where I live in Columbia, Missouri. So this bird that we had processed was detected at 2 stations in Missouri, one of which was a station in my town. And the station was purchased and donated or purchased and placed in memory of Brad Jacobs, who passed away in 2020. He was my predecessor and ornithologist at the Missouri Department of Conservation. And he was a major advocate for full life cycle conservation. He was essential in starting the Southern Wings program, where states contribute to full life cycle conservation efforts. And they placed the station in honor of Brad, and the very first detection was a golden wing that we had tagged, weeks before in Costa Rica. So we all know, if you're involved in Modus, that stories like this are what keep us going and what keep funding coming in and support occurring for Modus. And so it's just really exciting. So this was those detections in Missouri, and we were able to show a week-long stopover between our southern Missouri, our Ozarks, lots of contiguous forest, and then the bird coming north. There are only 2 stations in the entire center of Missouri, and this bird flew right past one of them. It's just, the odds are crazy. So I will stop sharing. I don't see Other folks with their hands up, please, I had like 10 or 15 minutes at the end of the webinar for questions or challenges or things you want to talk to with others who know a lot more about Modus. Please put those in the chat. We still have about 30 minutes, but if we don't have folks asking questions or with their hands up, we can end a little bit early. So I'll give you a few minutes and you can put any questions or unmute yourself. Okay, well, I guess we'll just stop a little bit early. I got to share my screen again and show you some to wrap up and tell you about the last Midwest Migration Network meeting, which is next Tuesday at the same time on Zoom. Bob, I will get to your question in just 1 second. Next one is on the Great Lakes Wind and Wildlife Coalition. Joel Merriman with the Avian Consulting Services is going to be leading that one, and they're going to talk about efforts to enable offshore wind energy development in the Great Lakes. I know where I am, there's a lot of talk about using Modus to inform wind facility placement that Chris Tonra talked about. I know that Stu has been involved with a little bit as well. So lots of great topics there. This is the agenda that they'll have for that meeting. And so I'll give you a few minutes to look at that. Okay, thank you, everybody. Bob, I'll answer your question with a follow-up email if you put your email in the chat. Otherwise, I think we will let others go. I really, really, really appreciate everybody being here. Stu, do you have any final thoughts for the group?
No, it's nice to see the few faces we saw. Nice to see all your names. Thanks a lot. Get in touch.
I think my survey link again in the chat. And go sign up for next week if you would like, if you haven't already registered for the Wind and Wildlife Coalition. Thank you guys again for being here. I very much appreciate your time. Thanks for all the people who chimed in to talk about your Modus work. And I will be in touch about a winter brainstorming meeting. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.